Okay, sounds like we've got Ed back on the line. Ed, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Max, yes.
Perfect. I guess the problem was I couldn't hear you, so now we've got that sorted out. Let's get right into it.
Great.
Thanks for bearing with us there. So, Ed, if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you're doing.
Sure, I can absolutely do that. I'm right here in Clearwater Beach, Florida. I've lived here since 2011. Before that, I lived in Las Vegas from 1998 to 2011, but I actually grew up in western Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh. And now what I'm doing with my life that I've been doing for almost 7 years now is I host a missing persons podcast called Unfound, which you can find on Spotify, iTunes. We have our website, theunfoundpodcast.com. We have a YouTube channel with about 16,000 subscribers. And since I started Unfound in September of 2016, I've covered almost 300 disappearances. And it is an interview-based format in which I have volunteers that help me, my assistants. We track down family members who have missing loved ones, and I interview them, and those interviews play on the podcast. And so I've done almost 300 of those since 2016. I don't know where the time goes.
It sure flies right on by, doesn't it?
It does.
What got you into podcasting?
Well, into podcasting, it's a bunch of different things put together. I have a little bit of a performance background. I have a writing background, public speaking background, improv comedy background. A lot of it gained while I was in Las Vegas for those years. But on top of that, since I was a little kid, and I will reveal my age as being 52, but back in the 1970s, I can remember the show In Search Of, hosted by Leonard Nimoy, of course Spock from Star Trek, the original Star Trek, and he hosted that show In Search Of, and I can remember as a kid being fascinated by that. You know, it's kind of a cheesy show, I guess we look back at it now, but it really caught my fascination about the world that was out there, and very early on I became interested in mysteries and disappearances like for example, Amelia Earhart, and which was covered on In Search Of at one point. And that just kind of continued, unsolved mysteries, cops, and then the internet came along, and it gave me an ability in my spare time to read about disappearances. And I can remember one of the first disappearances that I became interested in when the internet became a thing, like in the mid-90s, was right around the time that Jody Huisentruit from Iowa went missing. And I've followed that disappearance really since, I think about it, happened in 1995. And then I had the opportunity, I think it was in 2019 or 2020, to actually cover her disappearance on my podcast. So it was like everything coming full circle. So it was a lot of things kind of put together, both just something in my mind naturally, you know, going back to me being a child, and then just some of the experience that I've gained over the years with things I've chosen to do with my life.
Very fascinating. We'll get into this particular case that we're working on today, but first I want to just cover a little bit more information, generally speaking, about podcasting.
Yeah.
How does somebody like you go about such a thing? You know, what's the process of getting a podcast started and that sort of thing?
Well, Max, you could not be asking me that at a better time. I've actually, just within the last few days, started a Teachable course at teachable.com called How to Podcast Better Than Anyone. And it's at howtopodcastbetterthananyone.teachable.com, where people can go on there and pay for this course that I teach, that takes, goes right from the beginning. Why are you doing this? And, about you, the person, and what genre you're going to pick. Everything through how to make money podcasting. It's a 5-hour-long course divided up into sections, and I cover editing through recording, writing, everything. But just for the context of, what we're talking about today and that question, I think you just have to be comfortable with putting your ideas out there, your thoughts out there. You don't have to have necessarily the background that I do, although it certainly helps a writing background and speaking and everything. You might have to learn kind of on the job doing that, but I think that if you're really into it and you're really passionate about that, and whatever genre you pick, whether it's missing persons or video games or sports, whatever else, as long as you're passionate about that, I think anybody can get to the point where they're very comfortable behind a microphone and hearing their own voice and editing their own voice and putting yourself out there for people to hear what your thoughts are and research and investigations, whatever the genre may be, of what you want to do and what you think people should know. But so how to get into it, you just have to commit to doing it and have some of the right equipment and hook up with a good podcast host like I have Megaphone, which has been very good for me. And before that, it was Podomatic, which was very good for me as well. You just have to make that decision. And I know for a lot of people, maybe that's not easy to do. They just want to listen. But if you have something to say, you should think about podcasting.
Perfect. We'll get into equipment in just a minute, but podcast hosts, I've never heard of podcast hosts. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the thing is about podcasting is you certainly could just start recording on your home computer, get your own website, for example, wordpress.com, and put those audio files, those MP3 files on there for people to listen to. And you have to get people to go to your website, and you can do it that way. The issue is that you're probably not going to reach many people. And if you try to just directly try to get your podcast onto iTunes, which is the most popular podcasting place where all sorts of different podcasts are, they're probably going to turn you down. The same way with Spotify. I'm sponsored by Spotify for my podcast, but early on I tried to directly get on Spotify, and they rejected it. I'll just be honest with that, back in 2016, 2017. Whereas you get hooked up with a podcast host, what they will do is you record your podcast, then you send the file to them, and then they have the connections to iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, all these different places, and they will essentially get the podcast out there to all these popular platforms for you. And they'll also do some marketing for you. They also can get involved in advertising for you, so you can make some money doing it like I have. And that's a lot easier way than just trying to do everything yourself, just with like a website or something like that. Now, you're going to pay for that. Sending your file and then doing that for you is going to cost something, especially with the streaming costs, the storage costs, and all of that. But you can certainly make it worth your while if your podcast becomes popular enough. I mean, I have to be honest that, sometimes podcasts you're going to be paying, over $100 a month. But on the other hand, you could be making thousands of dollars through advertising. So, of course, would offset that if your podcast gets popular, whatever the genre may be.
I see, and I don't think there's a more popular genre out there these days than true crime. I see a lot of true crime podcasts out there.
That's exactly right. It certainly has to be one of the most popular. And the funny thing is that when I got into this in 2016, I had no idea. This was a decision that really I made on my own, and I did not realize until I really started doing it that, wow, there are hundreds of podcasts out there talking about serial killers and solved murders and all sorts of different things, school shootings. And it was just happenstance that I happened to get into a very niche subgenre of true crime, and that being missing persons cases only. There are only, 5 podcasts like on the entire earth that only cover missing persons, but that was not planned by me. That was just my passion. That is still, of course, my passion. And so Unfound and these few other podcasts, we have this kind of niche all to ourselves, and I think that is what has allowed Unfound and these other podcasts to be popular. Of course, the work that we do as well. But yeah, overall, true crime, on podcasting, YouTube channels, the Oxygen channel, ID, all of that. Yeah, hugely popular.
Oh, definitely. Now, I, of course, work in radio, so I'm familiar with the sort of equipment, but there's more equipment than I even know what to deal with up here at the studio for a radio station. Now, what sort of equipment does, I hate to say humble, but what sort of equipment does a podcaster need?
Okay, that's totally fine. I will tell you what I use to, and every podcaster is probably different. But I use a MacBook to put my podcast together. Of course, Macs, Apple products are a lot more expensive than Android phones, for example, or PC products like a Dell or an HP. But really, I use a MacBook, a laptop MacBook that's probably about 3 years old now. And it has a program on it called GarageBand, and that's what you record everything into. And then for the interviews that I do, really all I do is use my phone like we're talking today. And then I have a tablet that records both my side and the other guests, what they're saying. And then that file becomes an MP3 file on my little tablet, my Samsung tablet here. I send that file to my MacBook through a program like WeTransfer.com. And so now I have the file on my MacBook in this GarageBand program, and then I record on my own my side of it, and I just merge the two files together, and that ends up being a podcast, which is in an audio form of an MP3 file. Now, I will also tell you, though, that I sometimes use Zoom to do interviews, and then I can split the audio from that, but I also use the video from those Zoom interviews once in a while, and then the video will play on our YouTube channel, the Unfound Podcast YouTube channel. So sometimes viewers on there get to actually see the guest, and for that I use a program on that same MacBook called iMovie. So, when you're podcasting, you have to get very comfortable. You have to have a passion for whatever the topic is, but you're going to have to be a little bit of a technical wizard too. You're going to have to learn how to use your computers, your phone, your tablet very, very proficiently, to a point that you need to know as much about computers as you do about whatever topic you're covering.
I'm sure my listeners and I guess now you know that I'm very uncoordinated when it comes to computers. So it might be a struggle for me. What sort of resources do you go to get this sort of information for your stories? Where do you do your research, and how do you get some of these stories to come up?
Well, you have to realize Unfound is very different from many other podcasts. I do not cover a disappearance unless I can interview somebody about that. I don't just get onto the microphone and start talking about a disappearance for the podcast that comes out every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. What we do, and I have help, my assistants, very helpful, and volunteers. We're reaching out to families all the time. We find Facebook pages. We go back to news articles, old news articles, like on newspapers.com. We track people's names down, siblings, parents, children of missing people, and we talk to them, and I end up talking to them, and I invite them to come on to the podcast. We don't do interviews live. They're recorded and then played in the episode. So as far as research goes, most of the research really involves tracking people down to talk to who are knowledgeable about these disappearances. And then I let those family members tell their stories. I let them talk about their own feelings and what they've experienced, and interactions with the police and suspecting people, and the timelines and everything else that you can get into in talking about disappearances. So the research that I do, it really is talking to these people and making sure, of course, that they're not telling outlandish lies or anything. But I'm just here to ask the questions and guide the conversations in the proper direction, so that the disappearance, when we're done talking about it, let's say after 2 hours, that the listeners, the audience, has a very, very clear idea about who the person was. We really take a lot of time to really get to know that missing person. We just don't jump right to the circumstances, but we really take the time to get to know that person. And then we go into the circumstances, the investigation, and everything that has happened since. I'm just here to ask questions and guide the conversation. But the only way I can do that is really understanding the disappearance as well. And I learned that by talking to the guest beforehand. We have conversations before, maybe 4 or 5 hours, and then we do an official interview for the podcast. So that's how I do my research, by actually talking to the people who know what they're talking about.
Very fascinating stuff. We're talking to Ed Edsel from the Unfound podcast. How do you get a hold of some of these people? Do you just track them down through Facebook, or do you, I don't suppose you look up their number in a phone book or anything crazy like that?
Some people put their phone numbers out there, so that's not so crazy, because they want to be contacted. They want to talk about their missing loved one, especially when it gets to as old as Barbara Cotton's disappearances, from 1981. But there are a lot of Facebook pages where you can just send them a message. I do use some resources, some online databases that I pay for, where if I find a name in a news article, I can then track that person down, their email address, and email them. Of course, in the email, I state who I am, and I give links to everything that we do at the podcast. So these people can look the podcast up, can look me up before they decide to talk to me. But, there's a variety of ways we can find these people. It really just depends. And you should also know that the missing persons community is very small. A lot of my guests know each other because they've been to maybe gatherings, to Missing Persons Day in certain states. And so they'll say, oh, I had this great experience with Ed. He really knows what he's doing. He's very thoughtful about his questions. He does a lot of great work. That guest will then tell another family, hey, this Ed Denstall guy, Unfound, great podcast. You should go on there and talk to him too. So that happens as well.
Oh, it sounds very fascinating. I did not know that it was such a tight-knit
It is. It is.
Very fascinating. We'll get into the meat and potatoes of it, as it were, here in a little bit, but I just want to cover one more brief question, I guess.
Sure.
How do you vet the lies out? Do you know when somebody's lying to you?
I will tell you that, I just have to realize with disappearances, there are so many unknowns. This is not a murder where you have a body and you know that the person is deceased, and you know what the murder weapon is, and you know what the murder location is and everything. With disappearances, I've likened it to playing poker, whereas murders are more like playing chess. Disappearances are, limited information problems. And so you just have to get comfortable with the idea that there's certain things that cannot be proven. But the way I try to counter that, and you should know I've been doing this for almost 7 years, no defamation charges or anything like that. We don't go after people on Unfound. So we just try to stick to the facts, timelines, sightings. We get into the 21st century, talk about phone information, text information, social media information. And but you just have to get comfortable with the idea that there are going to be certain things that cannot be entirely vetted, and a lot of times I shy away from those things, or in those situations I kind of play devil's advocate and present kind of the other side of this possibility in an interview. But yes, certainly I've certainly talked to people who really tried to pull the wool over my eyes, and I just said, you know what, you can't be on Unfound. So that does happen.
I see. And do you ever talk to the police on any of these instances, or
it's once in a while. The issue, though, is that, as a podcaster, really what I am and what I do is I'm a reporter. And so I'm part of the media. And I've learned, I even learned this past week with the disappearance that I covered from Indiana, is I put in a call to an investigator who the family thought for sure would talk to me. The police officer never got back to me. This is very, very common because the police don't like to talk to reporters because of probably a lot of bad experiences with reporters regarding disappearances. So I don't do that a lot. I can read what police have said through articles and things, but It's rare that I talk to them simply because they don't want to talk to me because I'm the media.
Oh, sure. We're going to take a short break, and we will get back into the nitty-gritty details about your particular story here, Barbara Cotton, in just a moment. Ed, if you'll just hold on about a minute and a half or so, if you don't mind.
For sure.
And now, back to Live Under the Big Sky on Big Country KLTZ. It's brought to you by Prairie Ridge Village, Bank of Glasgow, member FDIC, Valley County Transit, EDT Kintyre Flats, Drive-In Financial, connecting faith and finances for good, Grow Co-op, Williston State College, Comfort Pros, and C&B Operations.
And we're back at it again with Live Under the Big Sky. We are talking to Ed Densel from the Unfound Podcast. So, Ed, I think the moment that you and everybody else is waiting for, why don't we get started into this story about Barbara Cotton? Pretty local story, and
yes.
I know a lot of people in our area, me in particular, have good friends with the last name Cotton, so that's recognizable.
Huh. Okay, sure, we can talk about it. I should start here, being that you asked me about that question, how do you find guests? This is a perfect example of people knowing people, in that the guest for this episode was Lisa Jo Sheely, who is a member of the Cotton family through marriage. But the reason that Lisa Jo and I even got to talk to each other in the first place is because another guest, his name is Julian, he's in New York City. Lisa Jo is a relative of his. So Julian was working on a disappearance in New York City, one that I covered a few months ago. And then he told me, you know what, you need to talk to Lisa Jo about the disappearance of Barbara Cotton. So that's how Lisa Jo and I got to know each other. So this is an example of what I mentioned in the first part of this interview. But what I learned in the interview that I did with Lisa Jo a couple months ago regarding Barbara and her going missing in 1981 is that Barbara was 15 years old, and unfortunately at the time in 1981 when she went missing, as many disappearances of teenagers are, it was dismissed as a runaway, and oh, she'll be back. You know, she'll be back. And that happens to this day in 2023. But as I like to say, it's a phrase that I've coined myself, is that disappearances are about people, they're not about circumstances. You really have to look at these people, no matter if they're a 15-year-old girl or a 40-year-old man. You really have to look at the person and to understand the disappearance. Why would that type of person go missing? And had the police in 1981 taken a deeper look at Barbara, I think they would have seen that she was not a very good candidate as a teenager to go running away. Yes, her home life was not perfect. Her parents were divorced, kind of split up. Some siblings living, other places. She had some older siblings, even up into their late 20s, early 30s, even though she was just 15. But she's living with her mother. Her mother, Louise, working multiple jobs. She's living with a couple younger siblings. Not easy circumstances in North Dakota at that time. However, Barbara was never known to cut school. She didn't have any relationships with any boys, causing her to, skip school or anything like that. She had great grades in school. She was doing perfectly fine in school. Everything kind of the opposite of the way we would think about probably a runaway. But here's where things get a little complicated, and the circumstances, as was established in the episode that we did a few weeks ago, is that still here in 2023, the circumstances, even though they seem to be very solid, and the circumstances, the most popular story since 1981, is that Barbara was out with a guy. His name was Stacy, and he was a 21-year-old. Seemingly a little bit of a drifter, which of course is, raises some yellow flags, if not red flags. And they were out somewhere. And the story is that she was walking home, and then somebody, maybe Stacy, maybe somebody else, saw her walk into this park by herself, and she was never seen again. And her mother, Louise, was waiting for her at home. Of course, Barbara never got there. And right away, Barbara, very early into that next morning, in April of 1981, started calling around and called one of Barbara's friends. The friend said, you know what, and this is like 1 a.m. or something, I don't know what to tell you. I have not seen Barbara. I have not spoken to her. I don't know what to tell you. So early on, Barbara's mother recognized that something was not right here. The issue is that here in 2023, we really still don't know who this witness was who allegedly saw Barbara walking into this park. It very well may be true, unfortunately, that's not what happened. So what continued from here is, it's obvious that Barbara's mother, Louise, put a lot of work into this. As much work as I've experienced with any mother who has had a child go missing. And you should know that mothers of missing children are the most common demographic that I interview for Unfound. Way more than fathers, way more than siblings, way more than children. It's mothers of missing children. And she obviously did a lot to try to track down where her daughter was. The problem is that she seemed to have information that could not be necessarily substantiated, and she never went about telling anybody how she got the information. For example, she somehow, we don't even know if this is true or not, found out that Stacy, this guy who allegedly was with Barbara that night, ended up in your state of Montana, and that Louise told the police in Williston, North Dakota, that I think that my daughter is at this motel, in this room. I think you will find her there. And so the police did this, but there was no proof that Barbara was ever there or that Stacy was ever there. So we don't know where Louise got this information from. However, coincidentally or not long after she told this to police, wouldn't you know that Stacy, Werder is his last name, he was taken into custody near where this motel was. And he was doing something, public intoxication or something like that, that he was taken into custody for that. So as a person who studies disappearances, not just reports them, asks questions about them, but studies them, is it a coincidence that Louise picked out this motel in this town that's right across the border into Montana from North Dakota? I've never been to this area of the United States, but I know Williston, very close to Montana, and right over the border into Montana. Is that a coincidence that she found this out, or did she actually know where Stacy was? Because there's no proof that Louise and Stacy ever met. So how then would she know where he was, and maybe that he was in that area, that he would eventually get caught for this, this publication charge or disorderly conduct, something like that. Not a real serious felony or anything. These are questions that still pop up in 2023. Louise was obviously working on this, but it's unclear what she was doing. And maybe I'll just stop at this point if you want to ask me any questions, Max.
Well, but I do want to just, highlight to our listeners that this is a very local case. Stacy was, if I am reading your documentation correctly, Stacy was arrested in Malta at the Villa Theater, which is a building that everybody in Glasgow drives by on their way to billing. So I mean, these are areas that we've seen, and he served time in Glasgow, correct?
That's right. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Right, and unfortunately, he committed suicide there. He committed suicide in his cell there. Not long after Barbara went missing in April of 1981, that he had committed suicide, yes.
Wow. So let's keep going down the story, I guess, if you don't mind.
Sure. So there's just these questions about Louise doing this work. In addition, going back to my guest, Lisa Jo. So Lisa Jo, of course, did not know Barbara, but she comes along. She marries into the Cotton family, and for years, nobody ever talks about Barbara being missing. Nobody talks about it. She was in the family for quite a while before she found out that, yes, there is a missing young woman, a girl in the family. And that is how Lisa Jo herself got interested in trying to figure out what happened to Barbara. And Lisa Jo has put a lot of great work, more than anybody else, even way more than the police there, trying to figure out what could have happened to Barbara. But what is also a little, once again, I'm not here to draw suspicion to Louise, Barbara's mother, but my experience is just different from what Louise did, is Barbara kept her entire family out of it. She would not give any information to any of the other siblings, anything that she collected. It was like a topic that wasn't supposed to be brought up. And so Barbara's younger siblings, for example, they grew up not knowing a lot of the facts that we now know, that now are public. They grew up not knowing any of them because their mother never told them any. Whereas my experience is that most of the time, parents pass on the responsibility to siblings. So a parent loses a child to a disappearance, that responsibility is then passed down to one of the other children when that child gets old enough to represent the family, usually, of course, in their 20s. A disappearance from Arizona, Mikhail Biggs, is a very good example of this, where now, here in 2023, the sister of Mikhail is responsible for publicizing Mikhail's disappearance, not the parents. The parents have, this is it takes a high emotional toll. But Louise never did that. So these are some questions. Now, what has also popped up, though, is that, of course, a lot of people think, well, did Stacy Werder do something to her? And we don't really get into theories in my podcast. We don't do a lot of theorizing and conjecturing. But we did talk about a guy, a serial killer, Frank De La Pena, who was seemingly working in the area at the time. And his modus operandi would be that he would lure women to him, faking an injury or needing help or something like that. Maybe the best example is kind of, if everybody knows the movie Silence of the Lambs, how Buffalo Bill lured that woman, the final woman, into his van. Kind of the same thing. That was Frank De La Pena's modus operandi. And could it be that he did something to Barbara, that he just happened to be in Williston that night, Barbara's walking home, and he does something to her, lures her into his vehicle or whatever, and kills her? There is no proof of that, but that has been examined. What I would say is that Barbara really did not fit his demographic of the women that he usually went after. In addition, Frank De La Pena's victims were found. So why is it that Barbara has not been found? So, but that's also something that has been examined over the years. In addition, Barbara's older brother, Frank, who happens to have the same first name as the serial killer De La Pena, has also been looked at. And the police questioned him, and there are some allegations out there from Barbara's siblings that Frank had abused them at one time. And so I'm inclined to believe that many people in the Cotton family, I would not put Lisa Jo in that category, but many people in the Cotton family are open to the idea that Frank, one of the oldest children of Louise, could have done something to Barbara. But once again, there's no proof of this either. Now, what's tough about all of this is not only did Stacy Werder commit suicide just a few months after Barbara went missing, but Frank De La Pena did as well. In fact, he committed suicide even sooner than Stacy did. And then Frank Cotton, the oldest brother, he died of natural causes, I believe, many years ago, maybe in the 1990s, maybe the early 2000s, but he's been dead for a long time. So 3 good suspects, if we want to go in a foul play direction, are deceased. That makes everything very difficult. In addition, Barbara's mother, Louise, died. And like I said, she really never passed on the information and everything, how she did everything that she did. She kept it all very close to the vest. And as what came up in the episode that I did on Barbara's disappearance, toward the end of her life, whether, I don't know if she had dementia, or it very well could be she was speaking the truth, Louise kept saying, I'm going to go to hell for this. I'm going to go to hell for this. And when people would ask her what she's talking about, she wouldn't tell them, or she couldn't tell them. Maybe she didn't realize what she was saying. Maybe she was delusional. I really don't know. But these are more than one person's heard her saying these things. So that in 2023 kind of draws attention back to her. Could she have had something to do with her own daughter's disappearance? And the toughest thing about April 11th, 1981, which is the accepted disappearance date, is that we don't have a lot of context for that day. We don't know what Barbara did that day. But just out of nowhere, this story came out that, yeah, she was out with this guy, Stacy Werder. But the problem is nobody besides Louise ever brought up Stacy Werder being in Williston, North Dakota at that time. In fact, Stacy Werder's own mother didn't even know where he was at that time. So I'll just stop again if you'd like to jump in with some more questions, Max.
Well, the one question that persists on my mind, very fascinating stuff, by the way, but the one question that persists on my mind is I'm very interested to learn more about this. And, of course, I have the readout here, but my listeners sure don't. So where might, some of the folks listening to us right now find your podcast?
Absolutely. A lot of different places. Very fortunate to have the podcast in a lot of different places. On iTunes, if you just go to iTunes to the podcast section and do a search for Unfound, you will find every single episode I've ever done there. 293 disappearances now, 357 total episodes. So you got a lot of listening ahead of you. Spotify, which is the company that I have a contract with. On Spotify, a very popular music app, podcast app. I would urge people to go there. Once again, all the episodes are there. Or maybe if you want to do something a little more personal, you can just go to YouTube and go to the Unfound Podcast channel on YouTube, and all of the episodes are there. And not only do you get to listen to the interviews that I've done over the years, but you get to see pictures of the missing person. You get to see maybe there's a car involved. You get to see a picture of the car. I do some map videos there. Those are probably the three most biggest ways that people find Unfound, but we're on other apps like Google Play and on the Amazon podcast app. Stitcher is another very popular app that you can download to your phone for free. And I should say, all the podcasts are free. Anybody can sample them, listen to them, or watch them at any time for free. No costs involved. And then there's also the Unfound website, theunfoundpodcast.com. We got on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, just as most podcasts are. We're everywhere in social media as well. But I would say iTunes, Spotify, and the YouTube channel are the three most common ways people can check out the podcast that comes out every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern.
There we go. Very fascinating stuff. Is there anything else you'd like to cover there, Ed?
I just want to thank you for having me on today. I love talking to people. I'm ready to talk to anybody at any time about disappearances. Anybody who shows an interest, whether it's a radio host or anybody else that shows an interest in the disappearances, they have a special place in my heart. Anybody who takes an interest in these disappearances. So I thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being on with us, and I thank you for your time and for your contribution and for the work that you've done, because, these sorts of stories, they might just break the case, you never know.
Sure. Absolutely.
Somebody doing all this background research, somebody's got to get somewhere sometime.
Right. I agree.
Well, yeah. Well, I thank you very much, Ed, and I do appreciate you coming on the show, and I hope that you have a fantastic day down there in beautiful, sunny Florida.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.